Republicans, more than 50%, support mass
The
deportation.
debate is on.
We fix this issue with a bill that is necessary, but the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this, and Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true, don't do it. There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Langford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Governor,
Hold on,
your time
Trump.
is up. Senator, I'll give you
Hold
1 minute,
on,
but
Trump.
let me just ask you the question first.
Man.
The governor has made the point, and I think as a city lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding.
Yeah.
So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive
Should we
action,
vote, man? What we gonna
solve
do?
this. Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our borders are. Kamala Harris has been, and it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities
they all
across
funny.
this country,
Say
you've
whatever.
got schools that are overwhelmed, you've got hospitals that are overwhelmed, you've got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete
But
with
they keep
Americans
just saying
for
they illegal
scarce homes.
immigrants.
The people that I'm most worried
Tell us
about
something
in
different,
Springfield,
man.
Ohio,
Tell
are
us
the
something
American
different, man.
citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything.
Yeah, I don't like that,
We can
man.
talk a little bit about Wall Street
I don't like
speculators
that.
buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill
Yeah,
also
I'm not
gives the
crazy
money
about it all,
necessary
man.
to adjudicate. I agree. It should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. Look, I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us, you do unto me. I think that's
I
true
went
of
to the
most
Bible, got
Americans.
me.
They simply want order to it.
Go to
This
the
bill
Bible
does it.
in the
It's
debate.
funded.
Don't do
It's
that.
supported by the people
Don't go
who
to
do
the
it,
Bible
and
in
it
the
lets us
debate.
keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Governor.
I
And
feel
just to
we
clarify
supposed to
for
treat
our
others
viewers,
good.
Springfield, Ohio
You
does
know,
have a large number
but
of Haitian
don't keep
migrants
telling me about
who
getting
have
on the
legal
immigrants,
status, temporary
and you're not
protected
getting on the
status.
immigrants.
Like, thank you, Senator. We have so much to
Everybody's
get
talking
to.
about the
I
immigrants.
think
It's like,
important
We're gonna turn out of the economy. Thank you.
Margaret,
They
the
just
rules
talking
were
on the
that you guys
immigrants.
were going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me,
What you
I think it's
did now?
important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the
At
wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a
all.
person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is
Thank you,
the
Senator.
facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by
Thank
our
you,
own
Senator, for
leadership.
describing the legal
And
process.
Kamala-
We
and
have
Kamala
so much
Harris
to get
opened up
to,
that
Senator.
pathway.
Those
We have
laws
so
have been on
much-
the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The
We
CBP
wanna have-
app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, you.
they try to cut his
the
mic
audience
off.
can't hear you because your
He
mic
kept
is
going.
high.
They
We have
tried to
so
cut
much
his
we wanna
mic
get
off.
to. Thank you for
Yeah.
explaining the legal process. Nora. Thank you, Margaret.
I just feel they just be talking all the time, and when we need production,
has released an
we don't
economic
see it.
plan. So let's talk about the specifics. walls. Vice President Harris
Tell
unveiled
me
a plan
about
that includes
what
billions
we
in
gonna
tax
do
credits for
to get the
manufacturing,
schools
housing,
more
and
funded.
child
Why
tax
are
credit.
we
The Wharton
waiting
School
for
says
money
your
that's
proposals
coming
will
from the
increase
government
nation's deficit
that they
by
print for the schools?
$1.2 trillion. How are
Why
you
is
paying
the
for that without
healthcare
ballooning the deficit?
underfunded?
I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank
That's
you.
the
And
stuff.
Kamala Harris
Why
says
is the
people
things
leaving
that
middle
are
class, but that's where we
necessities
come
to
from.
our
People
life
grew up in that, we understand.
not
So
being
look,
addressed?
tonight, you're hearing a lot of
But they
stuff back
talking
and forth,
about
and
the
it's good, it's
border.
healthy.
That's
what we're supposed to
that's
have.
why I'm
You
like,
should be listening, how's this
ah,
gonna impact me?
they
The
foo
whole
faffy,
plan
man.
that Kamala Harris put,
They foo
out
faffy.
there is one is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is, there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house. A house is
We
much
like that.
more
We
than
like
just an
down payment
asset to be
assistance.
traded
We like
somewhere.
that.
It's
We
foundational
like
to
that.
where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs $5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes, I've seen it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis, prices went down on rent 4%.
But people
It's
been
working.
charging
And then
a lot of
making
money
sure tax cuts
before
go to
the
middle
drugs
class.
that they know we
$6,000
need before
tax
Trump.
credit we have one in
So we
Minnesota
can't say that.
reduces,
Let's
childhood
talk
poverty
about
by a
what's
third.
going
We save
on.
money in the long run
The
and we do the right
schools.
thing for families. And then
Let's talk
resources
about
off the
that.
ground. The
They
law
don't
as it
talk
stands
about
right
that.
now is
That's what we should be
$5,000
wanting them to
tax credit for
address.
small business,
That's what we should be
increasing
going
that
out
to
to vote for,
$50,000. Now,
not
this
the
is a
border.
philosophical
Who going to
difference
control the
because
border?
Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this, he kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm gonna give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses,
hey,
that
bogus, man.
destabilizing it would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do, we'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works best, more people are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that, but similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis
We
of
like to
the
hear
Trump
when folks
plan
got the things
and
that they
says it
need.
would
We like
increase
hearing
the
that.
nation's deficit
That
by
sounds good.
$5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay
We
for
like
all
to hear
that
that.
without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer. A lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do, and some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies, and what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of
I don't
housing
want to
higher
vote
by about 60%.
for Kamala, but I don't like this dude either. I ain't even gonna lie.
Middle-class life unaffordable for a large
He
number
look
of
like a
Americans.
snake.
If Kamala Harris has such great plans
Yeah, he
for
look
how to
like a
address
snake.
middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust
And
her actual plans.
You know what,
Now,
though?
Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom. Because Donald Trump's economic policies to deliver the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers. Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts. But if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle-class and working-class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one. Whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing
Well,
goes
get
with
the
this.
heart
And I
surgery
ask you
people
out there,
more
teachers,
money
nurses,
and
truck
get
drivers,
more
whatever.
heart surgery
How is
people.
it fair that you're paying your
Talk
taxes
about
every
that.
year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years? In the last year as president.
Well, they
That's
should
what's
teach
wrong
the
with
whole
system.
world that
There's a
game.
way around it, and he's
The whole
bragging
world
about
should
that.
know how to
We're
get
just
no
asking
taxes.
for fairness in it.
He
and
know how
that's
to
all
do
you
it.
want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China,
they know how to
we'd
get
cheaper
taxes,
goods.
don't they?
They lied about that. They
Play
said
no
if we
games with
shipped
that.
our industrial
They know how
base
to
off
get
to
them
other
taxes.
countries, to Mexico
What
and
that?
elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much. And I hope they're in bed right now.
Hey, listen, right when he say that though, right, that we gonna make more of our stuff. Americans don't move like them people in them other countries when it come to making stuff.
And we're not going to stop it by listening
Them
to
people in them other countries, they go to war when they get to making stuff. We get lazy, then we want to raise the numbers. So I really don't think us getting people to make stuff here,
If you're listening
I ain't
tonight
feeling
and
that.
you
Let
want
the people
billionaires
keep
to get
making it
tax
where they
cuts,
make it at, because they
you want to know
produce
what the
it
numbers
quick.
were.
And then you can get it when you
I'm a
need it.
union guy.
People here gonna have the
I'm not
tax
saying
so
we want to ship
high
things overseas, but I understand that.
because
look,
they want to control
produce
it.
soybeans
Now, I ain't
and corn.
feeling
We need to
that.
have fair trading partners.
Let
That's
them
something
people
that we
keep
believe
doing what
in.
they've been
I think the
doing
thing that,
and put the tax
most
on them.
concerns me on this is
Whatever they
is
doing in
Donald
their countries,
Trump
let
was
them
the
do what
guy
they doing.
who created
You
the
know what I'm saying?
largest trade deficit in
They
American
gonna do what
history
they
with
do in
China.
their countries.
So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money
Right.
into companies that were overseas.
Yeah, I like that. Put the
The
money.
issue is Donald
Yeah,
Trump is talking
if
about
it's gonna make
Kamala
it
Harris
get
has a record
produced
50,000
faster,
more manufacturing jobs
and we
just
gonna
out of the IRA.
get it done,
Harris
and it's
started-
gonna be a right number for us,
So
of
appreciate
course.
that. So if you notice,
I
what
like
Donald
that.
Trump just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the
No,
statistics
that's a
show
gross
that he
generalization.
did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an
See,
America
that's
that's
where he
affordable
get the
again.
people
We
at
just gotta
when he
get
say
back to
that.
common sense
That's
economic
what.
That's the
No,
fallback. That's the fallback.
that's
Okay.
where he get the people
Senator,
at.
thank you, Robert. We have a lot to get to.
When he say
with
that?
this gentleman on many topics, but right now I want to
Yo.
talk about personal qualifications. The
What?
vice president is often the last voice the president hears
What?
before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy? Give us a
Yeah,
minute.
well, and to the folks out there who did get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything. Many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community. And then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Vance, in 2016, you called your running mate, Donald Trump, unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler.
He rides with Trump
now.
now.
You've been asked many times, and you've
said
those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear, and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that works for rural Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually
it's so
explain to the
scripted how
people
people talk in life when they're at this level.
You pointed out the messages from 2020.
Yeah, come
Margaret,
on,
I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration in the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing And you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says, you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora, thank you. Now the issue of reproductive rights.
They want to make sure that other
After Roe
countries.
versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law
Okay,
that made
about the women.
Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said, 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not what, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this is, well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic human right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about healthcare. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in healthcare for a reason. We trust women, we trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
Certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, one of them is actually very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had an abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to
see how he looked at it when he said that.
I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options.
And then the guy, him like, he don't know what to say on this. Like,
that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions. Let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes
so that's
the
what
most
he's
sense
saying.
in a very big, a very
He's saying
diverse,
he
let's
wanted
be honest,
they want the
sometimes
individual
a very,
state
very
to
messy,
make decisions.
divided country.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about
Instead of trying to just make it one state, each state letting them make the decision, and some states say no, so then most people had to go to other states to get the abortion. Yeah, and then you got them crazy states that they just
restricted state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina.
Yeah, I just said that.
Care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that your life and your rights, as basic as the right to control your own body, is determined on geography? There's a very real chance, had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, it was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world.
Honestly, because it shouldn't be nobody's fucking choice at all, wherever the fuck it is on that level. I don't even know how that even got started, but I guess that was because they wanted to keep populating the world, I guess. I don't know, but that should have never even been an issue. If you don't want to have the kid, you don't want the kid.
Democrats have taken a
What is
very
that
radical
issue for?
pro-abortion stance. But Nora, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy. He just said this already.
Y'all ain't winning nobody's trust
education,
like
destroy
this,
their relationships, and we have got to
talking about
earn
this
people's
dumb shit.
trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that, and that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications
it definitely
are
should
to
be a
not
woman's
that.
own choice.
Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator.
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion, that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby.
The world ain't free, though.
Please, do you think Catholic women are out there getting abortion? Can we be for real?
simple
don't think
proposition.
they ain't getting
These are
abortions.
women's decisions
Are they
to make
supposed to?
about their healthcare decisions.
Are they supposed to?
And
That
the
it
They're
gets
not
physicians
supposed to.
who know best
Okay.
when
The
they
Catholics
need
are
to
not
do
supposed to
this,
get abortions.
trying to
Okay.
distort the way a law is written.
I don't even
to
know
try
if
to
I
Christians
make
think
get
that's
a
not
abortions.
lot of
illegal.
this stuff they just
No,
make it up as they go.
I don't know if
Come on.
Christians get
Come
abortions.
on. Look, I've given how. I've given this advice on a lot of things that getting involved, getting engaged, that's been misread and it was fact checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things work best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best.
Why
That
they
doesn't
even mess with the
preclude us
Roe versus Wade
from
though?
increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So that hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget. Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact checked it with President Trump.
No.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move on, and we're going to be right back
And
with
they
much
got
more of the
it.
CBS News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
Yeah. He said they fact checked it.
Fact-checking
Yeah. He can't use that one no more. I tell you that.
He said nothing
He
after
can't
that.
use that.
It only treats your symptoms.
Yeah. So we seen that. He seen that. He fact checked him on
This man
that.
talking about some trust. Why would we trust you when now we have all these new scenarios of women dying and going into near-death cases because y'all done mess with some shit that nobody really asked for. You ain't hear no outcry of these groups that he's talking about that was voting the other way. Like nobody was talking about this.
Nobody.
Nobody was talking about this.
Yeah.
Everybody was like he said, minding their own business.
Yeah. I don't know why it even got messed with. You know what I'm saying? Why did they mess with it though? What made Trump and them go
I don't know
mess with it?
why. I don't know why Trump was so motivated to put these Supreme Court justices in to
Okay.
overturn this piece of legislation that again nobody asked to change.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I think it's a little bit of just like a power move, just to say that he could do some shit like that. You know what I'm saying? But I don't think that's anything that the majority of the American people ask for at all.
Okay. Yeah, so they just come up and just I gotta check that out.
No, like nobody. I don't.
Yeah.
Nobody was.
I gotta find that out. I'm gonna look that up. I have to look that up. Yeah. Why did he want to do that? Because I don't understand. What was the reason? You want that?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the reason for him to go want to mess with it for? I don't understand it. Like if it wasn't bothering nobody, like. This been going on. People go get the abortions for years, and it just.
Do you want a fourth Catholic hospital to perform?
What is that about?
But then it's like, if
Why did Trump go mess with the abortion? Why did he want to? What happened? Anybody know this? Because I don't know.
he said, if you,
Look it up.
he said, do you want the Catholic nuns to be forced to do abortions against their will? And but if I need an abortion, why would I go to the Catholic hospital? Why would I go to the Catholic hospital?
Okay, so yeah, so people make that decision. They opt to go to the Catholic hospital than to
I don't know why people.
the main
I
hospital.
don't know. I feel like he was.
I don't know.
grabbing.
They do that.
I feel like he was just grabbing. I feel like Walt ate that as far as again now basing who gets the rights on
Why
location.
did Trump mess with the abortion bill?
That was insane.
Yeah.
This whole notion of getting the rights out based off of location is insane.
I wonder if I can. Let me see. Why did Trump mess with the abortion bill? I want to see if they say it to me. Why did Trump mess with the abortion bill? I ain't say nothing. Ain't say nothing. Dirty. Usually say something. I thought he'd say something when you hit it. I want to find out. Yeah. What happened? Going to 2024. Man. Okay. Let me see. Hold up. Because I'm trying to find out why. Does anybody know why the abortion stuff got messed with? He said Donald Trump has said he wrote vote against a ballot measure in his home state of Florida that would protect abortion rights after facing backlash from conservative supporters. I'm telling you, they just be all over the place. They tell you something one minute, then they get in there and they backdoor the next minute. How you supposed to trust what they talking about, man? I tell you, they mislead us every time. They mislead us every time, man. Hold on. Where they do? It's back.
Welcome back to the CBS News Vice Presidential Debate. We want to turn now to America's gun violence epidemic. The leading cause of death for children and teens
They talk
in
about the gun violence
America is
epidemic.
by
Man,
firearms.
let's hear what they're going to say
Senator
about the
Vance,
gun violence
you oppose
epidemic.
most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
You know, Laura, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those
lock
decisions.
some
I think
parents
in
up, but I don't think it's going
yes, in some cases, the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just, how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartels. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago. But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
He ain't say that.
Well, I think all the parents watching
You
tonight,
said that?
this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing
That's crazy.
volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the San Diego parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-olds were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it, and here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that work. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen. even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go? When we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills. They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I appreciate it.
There's a lot of people witness shooting. We ain't feeling sorry because his son.
I appreciate what Tim said actually about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. First of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but it only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those San Diego parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is, talking about cities and where it's at, the number one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues. Making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns, and there are things that you can do about it. But I do think that this is one, and I think it's a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen, thank you. Margaret?
Thank
you, Nora. Let's turn now to the
That's true.
Inflation. The high cost of housing.
The guns is it. They want to blame it on mental health.
More than 4 million homes in the United States.
Sometimes it's just the guns.
And that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. First, let me say this issue of housing, and I think those of you listening on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the Vice President is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now look, you're gonna pay it back and you're gonna pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities.
I agree
The
with
fact
that.
of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable
Most
housing.
of the people that's
but we
here
can
going
make
like
sure that the
crazy.
government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far
I
as
agree.
your
We can't
campaign
blame
position,
immigrants
the
for everything.
promise is to seize federal lands to build
That's how they
homes,
do it. Try to
remove
blame
regulation,
everything.
provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up
They keep
costs.
saying the same shit.
25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with, but the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens if you lower energy prices? As Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill. One of the biggest drivers of housing costs, aside from illegal immigration, is, think about it. If a truck driver is paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build a house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer
Can I have it?
where, Governor, we will get to you in a moment, but Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up.
Well, they sound
Governor, I do
good.
want to let you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in
Well, of course, it's not
migrants.
true, and again,
and
you have the
then
facts, I guess we agreed not to fact check, I'll check it, that, look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office, but it's again, blaming and not trying to find a solution. I was gonna ask on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the country we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like, there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor, your time is up, but Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify, there are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. That in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, "I have concepts of a plan." Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. It's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency. Think about healthcare. You go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice and will also drive down costs. And we talked about the reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about.
Stuff that we need, it's just the medicine or whatever,
states to
the government should pay
bit
for
on
it.
how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill.
Make it right
It's not
over the
just a
stuff we
plan.
need. That's
He
the shit.
actually
Crazy,
implemented
especially
some
when
of
it's
these
all
regulations
here.
when he was
It ain't like you gotta
president
go
of the
to
United
another
States. I
country
think you
to
make
get
a really good argument
They
that
making this
salvaged
stuff here.
Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. I think it's an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President
That's
Trump
crazy.
has ever said or ever done.
They know
But
it's like
when
a big
Obamacare
game,
was crushing
man.
under the weight of its own regulatory burden and healthcare costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to
forced to
affordable
pick
care.
these people.
It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we could do.
It's like
I
you
think that
forced.
Donald Trump has earned the
You
right
ain't even
to
get the
put
chance,
in
you
place
ain't
the
make
better
the
healthcare
decision.
policies.
Nah,
He's
these are the
earned
only
it
people we get
because
to
he
pick.
did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill. Now, fast forward, what that means to you is you lose your pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They're figuring they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will protect and enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walsh has said is actually not true. A lot of what happened, and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight, is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president, inflation was low, take-home pay was higher, and he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this with young people or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then what happens?
You think the individual mandate's a good idea?
I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out.
Man, you really got to watch this and listen to them, because most people don't even understand what they're talking about, and they're going to go vote. You gotta watch this stuff, man. You have to watch this stuff.
It's there for you, because I heard people say, "Well, I don't want to buy."
You have to watch this stuff, because people are going out to vote,
the ACA works. We can continue,
and they don't even know what these people are talking about.
The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs.
You gotta watch
for
it.
the first time in American history.
Thank you, Margaret.
Can I
And it's like they both got key points
Let's talk about
on
families
both
in
sides,
America.
but
There is a
they're
child
talking
care
about
crisis in this
what they want
country,
to talk
and the
about.
United States
We
is
want
one
to
of
talk
the
about
very
what we
few
want to
developed
talk
countries
about.
in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you said that if
It's
Democrats
like
win
they
both the
pick
White House and
the
Congress,
things
this is
that
a day one
they
priority
think
for you. How
we are
long should
concerned
employers be
about.
required to pay workers
That
while
should
they
be
are
the
home
vote.
taking care of their newborns?
It
You
should
have
be a
2
vote
minutes.
on what the people are
Well,
concerned
that's
about.
negotiable, and that's
What
Congress
people are
works. But here's
concerned
what the deal
about,
is.
so that's what they can address.
You may work for a big company. We're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California.
Yeah,
Those
that's
companies
crazy.
provide paid family medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start. The family works better. We stay in their employers. We get more consistency in that.
Like shit
So
like
Kamala
that
Harris
though.
has made it a priority. We implemented it
Why
in Minnesota,
isn't
and we see
both
growth.
parties
That's how you
focusing
become
on the
a
main stuff?
pro-business
Why is
state.
this like
Put the
one
negotiations
party
on
is
it, and
saying
here's the issue. Those big companies are
they
able
would
to
do
offer
this,
it.
and it's
Those
like
of
this
you
is
out there
stuff
who
that
don't
should be
have it, just
both
imagine
people.
what happens if you get
You
cancer.
get more time and stuff like this, the healthcare. That's how you know it's like this that we ain't cared about.
No paycheck. Because you've got
America's
no
a
protection on that.
business.
This is the case
This
of
is
an
a straight
economy that
business.
Donald Trump has said
We can't
for
be
the
cared
wealthiest
about
amongst us. He's willing to give
if
those
all our necessities
tax breaks to the
are in
wealthiest.
limbo and
He's
debate.
willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the
You
economy
feel me?
works best when it
Why
works
are
for
all
all
the
of us.
necessities
And so paid family medical leave
in
program, and I will
limbo
tell you,
and
go
debate
to
now?
the families or go to the businesses. And
Why
ask
do
them,
we have
as
to
far as childcare
vote
on
for
this,
the
you have to
necessities?
take it at both the supply and the demand side.
That's
You can't expect
that's
the most
letting you
important
know
people in
that
our lives to take care of our children.
they
or
don't care.
Our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have
This
to
is
make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business
a
and then to make
business.
sure that folks are able to pay for
There
that.
ain't
We
no
were able
way
to do
we
it
should
in
be
Minnesota,
fighting for
and I'm still telling you
necessities.
this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A
You
federal
know what I'm
program
saying?
of paid family medical leave and help with this will enhance our
Ain't no
workforce,
way,
enhance our
man.
families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up.
Ain't no
Senator, do you support a national paid leave program? And if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats too have worked on this issue, and I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but
made
is
her
also
day.
a very, very brilliant corporate litigator.
You hear
And I'm
that?
so
He
proud
made
of
her day.
But being a working mom, even
said
for
that on
somebody
TV.
with
Oh
all
my
the
God,
advantages of
you
my
really
life,
spoke
is
about it.
extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company, but the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of childcare model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with childcare. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide childcare in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote childcare because look, it is unacceptable. And, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the past 7 or 8 weeks. And one of the biggest complaints I hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do it a heck of a lot better.
Senator, thank
Whoever
you.
gonna get in there gonna
You
change
have
that.
also said,
Because that
Senator
always been
Vance,
like that.
Many things
Where
about
somebody
the
had to
American
choose if I'm gonna go to
family.
work
The Federal Reserve
or I'm gonna
says
take care of
parents
the kid in a
must
certain
spend
sense. You know what I'm
nearly as
saying?
much on child
Some
care
people got
as they
family
do
members
on
that help, but
housing
I don't
each
think
month.
that's going.
So I want to
They
get your
just talking
thoughts
on
on
that.
this. President
Because it's been
Trump
going on for so
recently
long.
said, as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. If President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described, you have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan. Cut taxes for American workers and American families. Cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, childcare options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
Can you clarify how that will solve the child care shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the childcare shortages, we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide childcare options for American families. Because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, your ticket also has some child care tax credit proposals. Do you think Congress will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised? Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's 5,000 or 6,000, that plays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarship types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you ask is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is, if those members of Congress, I can't believe they're not. When I go to businesses, sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with childcare and they will lead with housing, because we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need more workers because our economy is growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Laura, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president, Donald Trump left the White House, and now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by 2 lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues. And that, to me, is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here, and I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator. But
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this, and the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he did. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day, some with the American flag, several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, we're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue, and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country apart.
Margaret?
Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say, as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think a revisionist history on this. Look, I don't understand how we got to this point. But the issue was that happened. Donald Trump, can you do it? And all of us say there's no place for this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship. Censorship is book banning. We've seen that. We've seen that brought up. I just think for everyone tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator Vance. I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement. This is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just have said, did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of the government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't
Senator,
wear
the
masks.
governor does
That's
have
not
the floor.
fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to
Please.
respond to you.
Yeah. Well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this, I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not. It's not
He lost the
anything
election. It's not a
anywhere
debate.
other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with
Yeah,
both
war.
of our candidates. The CBS News Vice
They
Presidential
had war.
debate
They had
continues.
war.
I think it'll probably be closing arguments.
Yeah, they was at war. They got beefed up there at the end.
This is definitely a really good one. I think that they're really getting to the nitty gritty. You know, I think that the presidential debate was a lot of fluff.
The first
Yeah.
debate, yeah, the president's one. It's the vice president.
I feel like they said a little something, but we didn't touch on the policy nearly as much as the way we touched on it.
It
in
was
this
too much
one.
tension.
Yeah, I don't, yeah.
Yeah, it was too much tension. Yeah, so they was just trying to get there because there was beef. Now these two right here, they've been hitting the points though. They've been hitting situations about what they want to talk about, but I want to talk about the schools and the justice system and stuff like that. But they've been hitting their points. I feel that they should have been talking about like the justice system, the schools, but they talking about the borders, and then they at war with each other about each other's policies. Donald Trump wants to ban abortions, and then Kamala Harris, they want to let what he said they want to let him do. Kamala Harris, they want to let him
They want the migrants in.
they want to let the immigrants in and letting them get the votes so that they can get the win. They don't want to block the borders, but Trump is saying he want to block the borders, but the borders, they not going to be able to block them because they not going to vote for them to block the borders. So it's like they just talking, but I don't understand.
I do agree with Wilson. I feel like, that was definitely Trump's main thing when he was coming out, was like, I'm gonna build this wall. I'm gonna build this wall. I'm gonna build this wall. And the Mexicans didn't pay for it.
And it didn't happen.
And we never did see the wall.
Yeah.
We never did see the wall. And
Some people be building underground tunnels though. They still gonna come over here regardless. Them people be building tunnels, and they find the tunnels all the time. So if you build a wall, they gonna find a way to get over here. So I really don't think that it's gonna be a way to shut it down. I'm sure it's a way that they can be more strict with it, the border, but I don't think it's a way they're gonna just stop it. So I don't think that
yeah.
you know what I mean? They're gonna have to tighten up on it, and I can say that with Kamala Harris and Biden in there, a lot of things in the street have been coming and they've been cheaper in the street. So when Trump was in office, things was higher, and that means that it was more strict from things coming here. That's what the thing I think with Trump is. They want to go to war, like I said, to control what's coming here, to show that they got power. Biden is just like, all right with this and all right, all right, Kamala, I guess they not trying to hold it on other countries. I think Trump doesn't like that other countries profit so much off us and we're not taxing them as much. It's like these guys are shipping stuff back and forth. So that's all his mind's on the business with that, when he should be focusing on what's going on with us and, like I said, the justice system. I know he gonna get on the justice system though, because they done mess with him. So I do know, and he can't say that right now because he got the charges. So you can't be like, oh, now you're going at the justice system. But I know that when he get in there, he is gonna mess with the justice system for the simple fact that they done charge him.
It's now time for the closing statement. Senator Vance won the virtual coin toss and elected to go last. So Governor Walz, you are first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Senator Vance. Thank you to CBS News. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift, and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything, but they are truly optimistic people. They believe in a positive future of this country and one where our politics can be better than it is. And I have to tell you that that better than it is the sense of optimism that there can be an opportunity economy that works for everyone, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And the idea that freedom really means something, not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage, and then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz, thank you. Senator Vance, your closing statement.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that too has gotten harder with because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. but they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say, I'm so proud to be doing this and I'm rooting for you. God bless you and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle. I'm Margaret Brennan.
And I'm Nora O'Donnell. And a reminder, there are just 35 days until Election Day. Please get out and vote. And for all of us here at CBS News, thank you and good night.
There you have it. Back to ABC News live coverage of the vice presidential debate tonight. There you see J.D. Vance, Governor Walz shaking hands. They shook hands at the beginning of this debate as well. 90 minutes between them talking about the Middle East, the situation, the tensions that we've watched unfold. Israel now vowing to retaliate against Iran, foreign policy at large. They also talked about immigration, border security, economy, inflation in this country, housing, democracy, peaceful transfer of power. At the end, they had a lengthy debate on January 6th, and looking back and what actually happened in this country. 90 minutes between these two gentlemen. Mary Bruce, what are you hearing from the Harris campaign tonight?
I'm a Spanish mixed during the song.
Look, I think that they're...
Vance got himself nice. Hold on, he got himself nice. You see that?
Going on. It certainly seemed to take him a little while.
He got a little
to
Spanish mixed
I
joint.
think the campaign does feel, though, that once he did get into that stride, that his plain-spoken style certainly resonates.
She came out there because you know he said,
hitting the
on
issues,
the joint.
articulating the issues,
No,
and I think
he's
they're
white.
constantly linking back to Donald Trump.
Yes,
And at several
he
points,
did.
even highlighting daylight between what Vance was arguing and what Donald Trump stands for. They especially feel that moment at the end where Vance was describing what happened on January 6th and his refusal to say, who won the election, that was a strong moment for the Harris-Walz ticket. I will say, you did see over and over again Senator Vance trying to argue it back that Kamala Harris is still in office and that she should have done all of these things over the last 3.5, 4 years. It's unclear whether that will resonate, but it is interesting. You constantly heard J.D. Vance going back and arguing that she's not the change candidate because she's currently in office, trying to get at that central argument of the Harris-Walz ticket. But there's a reason that I think the old adage